Вітання всім глядачам і слухачам подкасту «Ночі дівочі». Я його авторка і ведуча Леся Монзевич. І цього року ми вже начебто створюємо традицію, тому що ми записуємо один епізод подкасту на Книжковому Арсеналі, найбільшому книжковому і інтелектуальному святі країни, я би так сказала. І цього разу мені дуже приємно, тому що і це також свого роду челендж, тому що вперше наш подкаст зазвучить англійською мовою. І я маю велику приємність вітати в нашому подкасті Марсі Шор, історикиню, професорку тепер вже університету Торонто. Марсі, hi. I was just saying that you are the historian and you're a professor now at the University of Toronto. Am I right?
Yes.
Welcome to the podcast, Ночі дівочі. I don't really know the way to translate this into English. It's something like girls' night out.
Girls' nights, Noche de voce.
Yeah.
No, that's...
So I'm still figuring out about the translation, but maybe I'll wind up, because sometimes we talk about like girly stuff, but sometimes we talk about serious stuff, like everything that women endure right now in these turbulent times.
Noche de voce, I have to use that expression.
Thank you for finding some time to talk to us. It's a great pleasure for me. And my first question would be, how do you like this whole environment that you've been experiencing and you've been put in for the fourth day now?
Okay. No, дуже дякую за питання. No, я перепрошую, що буду говорити англійськи. I already feel guilty about that.
No, у вас чудова українська мова.
I can make it out, but I studied Czech and then Polish and then Russian and then German, and so I can fake it, but I don't really speak Ukrainian. But I like Noche de voce. I have to use that.
Please feel free anytime. So how do you like Book Arsenal? This is not your first one.
No, it is my first one.
It is
my first one. I had hoped to get here last year when Volodya and Tanya were curating, and 2 years ago when Natalka was curating, and I just wasn't able to make the trip. So, no, I'm thrilled to be here. It's fantastic.
What do you like? I can't share this, excitement about the Knижковий Арсенал, because this is my third one. And the first time I came here, it was just mind-blowing, because it was 2023. And this was the first time the book Arsenal was happening after the full-scale invasion. It was just like the greatest example of our resistance, because when you see all these people who are coming in and who are, just as you said today, who are ready to listen and who are ready to read and buy all these books, that means that we exist. Something like that. You are traveling to Ukraine quite often.
Not so often, but I would say that this is my fourth trip since the full-scale invasion.
So
I've noticed that people now count since the full-scale invasion.
Yes.
I came to Ukraine for the first time in 2002, but now that's ancient history. Now people are counting for the full-scale invasion.
And since it's your fourth time in Ukraine, do you feel a change in people's mood? Because there were different stages. First, we were in the shock of war. Then we were very hopeful for a quick victory. And now there are these peace negotiations that are kind of, they're trying to make this thing, work, negotiate this thing out. What do you feel about when you're speaking to Ukrainians? What do you feel the change in our moods, our hopes?
That's precisely what I'm kind of trying to understand now. No, you need to tell me what has changed. Last year, when I was in Kyiv last March, it was there was a lot of bombing or a lot of missiles, and everybody was waiting on the American supplemental aid, which was being held up in Congress by Mike Johnson, who was beholden to Trump. And so there was a sense of this could be the last moment that Kyiv is safe, because once we run out of air defense ammunition, it's all over. And I felt like there was so much kind of desperate hope in, was this aid going to come through, or was it not going to come through? And that was my focus in some sense as well. You know, I came here with my friend Amelia Glazier, and we were going back on the plane, and we're thinking, okay, what can we write? How can we push Congress? You know, how can we utilize, you know, the experience in Ukraine to make a stronger case? I mean, there was a sense that that was the really crucial thing. And now I think, I mean, one, I would not blame Ukrainians if they just never wanted to see another American again, you know, after the way Zelensky was treated in Washington. But I think there is more of a sense, both resigned, but also with some self-confidence, and I could be wrong if I'm wrong, that we can't count on America.
We have to count on
We have to count on ourselves. Yeah.
But that is, I could probably agree with you. And well, to me, it's like this is an unavoidable process of getting older as a nation, like maturing ourselves, because this is the thing I've noticed for the past like couple of years, that we are more growing into being ourselves. We are kind of rediscovering our heritage. We are going back and rereading our like classical poets, classical writers, trying to find new narratives in their text, because the way it has been put up, like even during Soviet times, we did have Taras Shevchenko, Lesa Ukrainka, Ivan Franko, but they were like very flat. And they were so high up above in the skies that you wouldn't even read them, because it's either too complicated or there was so many sufferings in their writing that you wouldn't want to like deal with them every other day, and you don't open the book. You know that they are classics, you cherish them, but you don't read them. Right now we are kind of trying to reopen these books and find something other that has been given to us by Soviet, I don't know, schooling even, because kids were taught this in school. And it is a part. But regarding Americans, well, I will speak about myself, because when I was a teenager, when I was 15, I was a part of the Flax Future Leaders Exchange Program, and I spent a year in Kansas.
Oh, wow. What year was it that you spent in Kansas?
It was 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And it actually, I think that trip, it kind of changed me forever, because I was a senior in a high school and I was sent to America it was a program for the children from the post-Soviet countries, and I was one of the finalists. And I've been told there that you, as a human being, you can change things, you can influence on your surroundings, on your environment, and there is democracy, and one of the obligatory subjects that we were supposed to learn while being in the United States is U.S. government and all these checks and balances things, and the democracy. And so it was 2003 and 2004, and I came back home and I was about to choose my major, where I want to study at the university, and I came into my dad and I said, okay, I'm probably going to study political sciences. And my dad is like, what? Why? And I said, well, because if not me, then who? If not now, then when? And so that's what I did, and that's how US kind of changed me forever. And I've been also kind of, it gave me the feeling that democracy is important. And now I feel a little bit not disappointed, but a little bit messed up in sorts of ways when I see what is going on in the United States and actually the system of checks and balances that you were so proud of, they don't necessarily work. And how do you feel about this?
It's wrenching, it's heartbreaking. I probably was always less idealistic about it than you were after no, I mean, I've noted people who, the contrast with the Soviet and post-Soviet experience, I think is so dramatic that it facilitated people's having a much more romantic vision of America than you might otherwise have. You might remember that moment at Trump's first impeachment trial in 2019 when Alexander Vindman testified, and he's from Soviet Ukraine. He came as a refugee with his brothers and widowed father, in the 1970s, escaping the Soviet Union, and embraced with enormous gratitude this country, believed in all its promises, made a whole military career, and when he stood up to testify against Trump, at the end of his opening statement, he said, "Don't worry, Dad, here in this country, I don't have to be afraid to tell the truth." And I wanted to hug him, because it was something I felt like only someone who had fled the Soviet Union would say, with such authenticity. I mean, he absolutely believed it. And it was not truth in the way we use it in English. It was really pravda, the way the Soviet dissidents and and Václav Havel used the word pravda, the thing that was, that value that was as real as the keys to a door that you could hold in your hand. And of course, you knew that it wasn't true. He did have to be afraid. Of course, there was going to be retaliation. The rule of law had broken down, but he was such a believer, and that was very moving to see. And I understand that. I understand that contrast. I gave an interview after the first Trump election to a young Russophone Ukrainian journalist somewhere, I don't remember, but somewhere in Eastern Ukraine. But we did it by email in Russian. And I always answer the questions very honestly. I answered them all honestly. He just wanted to hear it was all going to be okay. American democracy was strong. We were all going to survive. And I knew it was not going to be okay. And I was very brutal and honest about it. And I forget the phrase he used, but he posted it on Facebook when the interview came out with something that was just so heartbreaking. How could she do this to me? This is what we believed in. This was this model. This was this model. Don't tell me it's not real. And I've been watching it crumble, and it's awful.
Well, actually, that was the thing for me too, because I was brought up in this manner that good will always defeat the evil, and now we understand that. Now we are put in the situation where good and evil, they have to sit around one table and negotiate the way out. And this seems so unfair, but can we even talk about fair nowadays at these times?
God, I so want to believe that good is ultimately going to win. And that is an act of faith at this point. I kept thinking, aren't we at that moment in the movie when the good guys start winning? When do the good guys start winning? I feel such despair and disgust, and I'm how is it that the most despicable people on this planet have such a disproportionate amount of power? You think the percentage of a given population that is really hardcore sadist, psychopath, people for whom other people's lives mean absolutely nothing, people like Putin and Trump, that has to be marginal. It has to be a small percentage, but somehow grossly overrepresented in positions of power. So how did we get this negative selection problem? Why are so many of the worst people for whom other people's lives mean nothing? Why are they wielding so much power? There are very good people in Washington. There are people in Washington I would trust personally, but they're not the ones in power right now. So why is it? I mean, I watched that Oval Office meeting with Trump and Vance and Zelensky, and with such a visceral sense of disgust and shame and rage, like I wanted to I wanted to take the screen and shake it. Like I thought, how have we descended to this level? And when Trump said to Zelensky, this man has such a hatred for Putin. How am I going to make a deal? He has this irrational hatred for Putin. I thought, you know what? When you're watching someone bomb your cities and bury your kids under rubble, and torture your journalist with electric shocks day after day after day, you might not have warm feelings towards them.
Yes,
and
rationalize this pain.
And if you did have perfectly normal feelings towards them, something would be wrong with you. Like that's not like there needs to be some kind of distinction between good and evil. It can't all be radically relativistic. I mean, we're watching this Oval Office meeting, and you're watching Trump. He's like, I'm trying to make a deal. I'm the deal maker. This is just the obnażenie продажность. Like completely, like everything is transactional. It's all a game. It's all a deal. There's nothing else.
There is no good, no bad. It's all transactional and relative.
I was trying to express this in English, and I was like, there's this expression in Polish, which is, znalazłam się na samym dnie I wtedy usłyszałam pukanie od spodu. Stuk znizu. Yeah, exactly. Like, and we don't have that in English.
Not postuka.
And then when I was Russian friends then tell me that like there are actually multiple ways to say that in Russian. Niza niet, dnia niet, dnia nie существует, stuk znizu. I'm like, that's a really rich vocabulary to speak about this. There's no bottom. You think you've reached the end of the depravity, and then it gets worse. And I think, okay, it must be, first of all, very significant that there are so many ways to say this in Russian, but also like, I feel like that every time I turn on the television, you've got like the Trump Gaza video, and I'm like, you're just ethically cleansing a population, burying those kids under rubble, and then making an advertisement for the beach casino that you're going to have. Like, is there no bottom? Is there no point in which you feel disgusted with yourself? But no.
Today on the stage, when you were speaking to Volodymyr Yarmolenko about Hanna Arendt a lot, you were speaking about one of her concepts, the banality of evil. And in regard of Trump being elected in the U.S., you are saying that this is a marginalized group. It has to be a marginalized group, but still, a lot of people voted for him. And I have two thoughts. One of them is that, America was so not ready for a female president, for a woman president, so they elected Trump for the second time, because first time he won from Hillary Clinton, and this time he won the popular vote over Kamala Harris. And why is that Americans are so afraid of a woman president? Are they, in fact, or this is just the banality of evil? The thing is that people, they don't really care that much about who's going to be elected. That's why they don't go voting. Or maybe they just want this strong big bully, because Trump to me is nothing but the big bully on the international scene. What is the reasoning behind all this?
Well, I would say the banality of evil, I think, is very much in effect, but I wouldn't necessarily use it for the question of the female candidates. I think that's, when I think about the problem of the banality of evil, you think about the border guards who are taking the children from their parents on the U.S.-Mexican border and throwing them in cages, the people who are arresting the students, and throwing them in prison, the foreign students, or who are just taking any Latin American guy with a tattoo and deciding he's a terrorist and chaining him up and tormenting him, and like all of those people who are implementing cruelty without necessarily any personal reason to, other than that they're going along with what their job is. I think that's more the category of the banality of evil. The thoughtlessness of like, okay, I was told to do X, I'm going to do X. The issue of the woman candidate, and of course you can't do a control study on real life, but it is true that of the 3 times Trump was running, he was defeated by a man, and both Hillary Clinton and lost Kamala Harris. that was just so heartbreaking, both times. And the first time, I felt like I'm going to say Democrats, the anti-Trump opposition, were too complacent. I was very, very nervous in 2016, and I panicked sooner than most Americans because I was watching what was happening in Russia and Ukraine, because I was watching Putinism. I had a sense that this post-truth thing where you're not constrained by empirical reality, it's not a joke. And if I understood that sooner than most of my American colleagues, it's not because I was smarter, but because I was watching what was happening in Russia, and I knew this could get very bad very quickly. But there was too much complacency in that. It seemed so outrageous, and it was so clear Hillary was the stronger candidate that there was an assumption. I thought too, I was very nervous, but if you asked me, I thought Hillary's going to win. Hillary's going to win. That's
what we thought too.
That's what, there was really, and I think there was too much complacency and not enough work. That was not true this past election, and people are angry that Biden didn't pull out sooner and earlier, and would that have helped? I think, however it happened, I think Kamala Harris ran a great campaign. I'm not an expert on political campaign. For the time she had, and I thought, and Americans changed their minds so quickly, I thought that was plenty of time. In any other country, it would have been plenty of time. It's not like nobody really knew who she was. They didn't have a chance to listen to her talk. There weren't any. No, it was enough time. It was enough time. The Democratic National Convention went spectacularly well. I thought she came out with an enormous amount of energy. She was very sharp. She sounded intelligent all the time. I also thought, this is sort of relevant to the gender issue, so her husband, Doug Emmons, and then her running mate, Tim Walz, I thought they did a fabulous job of modeling non-threatened masculinity. Both of those men were very happy to let her have the starring role. They were not resentful, they were not undermining, they were supportive, they were real men who were happy to play that role, and I thought they were doing a great job of modeling non-threatened, non-toxic masculinity for other men.
Do you think this future will come around? Where will be more examples of non-threatening masculinity in action?
I hope so, because it has to be this is one thing I think that the Belarusian feminists did very well. I think one of the things I found so inspiring about these women in Belarus, who played such a leading role in this revolution that should have succeeded, was that in 2020, that they had developed a language to talk about domestic violence in a way that worked both literally and on a larger scale metaphorically. That became a language not just for women to talk about, how they were being beaten by their husbands, but also to talk about how people were being treated by a tyrannical regime. They were very the whole biot znaczy lubit thing, it has to be over. And we have to, it's not just about replacing men with women, it's about taking that whole model of biot znaczy lubit, that strength is about abusing people, that strength is vertical and someone is always on top and someone is always being crushed. It's a Ktokovo model, right? It's basically Leninist, Ktokovo. Someone is always crushing someone else. And their idea of feminism was not just women instead of men, it was horizontal solidarity. You have to make caring for other people to be the model of strength and not crushing other people. And this is a revolutionary idea, in fact, which should be true for all of us. It should be that your caring for other people is what strength is about, and not your ability to crush other people. And I thought that is the way forward, and they should have won. How it went wrong in the States, there was, if you haven't listened to this speech, you should. Michelle Obama's speech 10 days before the election. She gave a speech. She gave a fantastic speech at the Democratic National Convention.
Michelle Obama.
It's worth taking a clip of it because this was one of the great feminist speeches. She gave it about 10 days before the election, say very end of October. And one of the things she did is she's also one of the great orators, of her generation. But she took about 8 minutes, which is a long time, and she did a deep dive into the price that women pay for restrictions on reproductive health care. And she did it graphically, and she did it in detail, you know, and she went through these stories of just what happens, you know, when doctors have their hands tied, you know, and she says to these men, like, you're going to be the one raising the kids alone when your partner dies. Like, I mean, and it was very brave. No one has ever done that on that kind of political stage before. And it was fantastic. Like, it was exactly what somebody needed to say, you know, and so she addresses men and she's like, do not let us be the collateral damage for your rage. Like, do not let, you know, you are sacrificing our lives because you want to make a statement about being angry, about being, you know, having grievances, you know, but then she addressed women and said, remember, your vote is secret. And then there came out these so-called secret voter ads. It was just like 10 days a week before the election. It was a very, very last minute. And so they were ads that were, the Lincoln Project did one, somebody else did one. I think they had a famous actress in one. And so they're little narrative political ads that show women going to the polls with their husbands who are Trump supporters, you know, and the husbands assume that the women are on their side, their wives are on their side, we're all going to vote for Trump. And the women pretend that they are. And then they go into the voting booth and you see them exchange these glances with their eyes, you know, and the women silently, you know, above the walls of the voting booth communicate to one another that they will secretly vote for Kamala Harris and they will never tell anyone and their husbands will never know. And it was, to me, it was terrifying. Not that it was a bad idea. I mean, I think it was probably a good idea to reach that demographic.
It was some kind of a red flag.
It was terrifying because it was clearly aimed at a demographic of women who were afraid of their partners. The subtext was violence. The subtext was that these were women who were afraid of their husbands. You know, and it was like a scene out of The Underground in The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes, that's true. That's exactly what I was
exactly thinking. Like, and that was terrifying to me. I watched it with my 12-year-old daughter, and it was a very proud parenting moment for me because she said, Mom, you know, the first problem is that those women should not have been married to those men in the first place. And I was there. It's like, yes, that is the first problem. You should never, ever be in a relationship with a man you're afraid of. That should never happen. Like, but there was a sense, you know, clearly on the part of, you know, people who were supporting Kamala Harris's campaign that there were a lot of women out there who were afraid of their partners. But perhaps if you made them feel that it would be safe, really themselves wanted to vote for her.
See, this is the thing. We've never thought in Ukraine, we followed American election like really precisely, but there are some facts, you know, that, you know, just slip away or we are not paying that much attention because we have lots of things going around, but it does make a lot of sense. And you started talking about Michelle Obama, who is like really an inspiring figure for a lot of women. And we also mentioned Hanna Arendt before. And this season in our podcast, we're like revising the prominent Ukrainian women of the past, who can become an inspiration for our present. What are your role models, or do you have role models within, I don't know, philosophy, history, scholars, like political figures? Do you need one? Because us women, we are very good, you know, in mentorship. When someone is leading by example, when you see that she has made it, she has done that, that means I can do it as well. And that's why, well, personally, I am always in search for, you know, somebody to get inspiration from, to be inspired from. What about you?
They're definitely, I would say role models. I try never to idealize anyone because what you know as a historian,
bits and pieces that you can pick from.
Definitely. No, there are bits and pieces. There are, you know, Hanna Arendt has been with me forever. I mean, since I was 19.
Me too.
You know, and she's someone I always feel like I'm thinking with and drawing ideas from. There are There are some great women from Eastern Europe in the 20th century who are largely unknown, who lived through hell several times over. Hedda Margolis Kovali, Miloslava Holubova, Alina Margolis Edelman, who are really among the great women of the 20th century, had extraordinarily strength, who went through Nazism, who went through Stalinism, who were victims of both, and kept fighting for the good to the end.
That's great. Actually, I've read in your Wikipedia that you have in 2003 you have published a pamphlet, Czysto Babski, a woman's friendship in a man's premonition. I wasn't able to find the full text of this article.
I can send it to you.
But please, I just read only the first page. But is it something about the women, the female friendship?
It's very interesting. Well, I'm sure it will be controversial in some sense for Ukrainians, but Wanda Wasilewska was Alexander Korneychuk's wife. So she, in some ways, will be a figure who comes into Ukrainian history. She ends up staying in Soviet Ukraine after the war.
A lot of women who were of mixed origin, or were Jewish, or were of mixed heritage, they decided to stay in here, not to
That was not her case. She stayed because she was a Soviet sympathizer. She was one of the people who helped usher communism into Poland, as was Janina Broniewska.
Okay.
So these are not women who were innocent. They were women who had very complex relationships with some very famous men, including Stalin. And for whom the most important relationship in their life remained the relationship with each other. So it's an incredibly complicated and morally ambiguous story. But I was absolutely fascinated by it.
Well, that is the thing. That's what I was saying in one of the previous episodes. There are these women that we are trying revise now. There are some things that we can learn from them, but there are some examples of what not to do with their experiences. That's why it's still very much valuable to understand all of these things and not to canonize them as a whole.
If I can tell it maybe a more Ukrainian story. So right before the full-scale invasion, when the Russian troops were building up around the border and nobody knew whether Putin was going to invade, but we knew everyone was watching. It's not like we weren't watching. And I wrote to Natalka Gomanyuk and Angelina Karyakina, and what can you say in this situation, right? I just said, "Yes, Vami." I'm thinking of you, "Yes, Vami." And Angelina wrote back right away, and, she's like, "Thank you, Marci." She's like, we are ready for whatever comes and ready to work. And I thought, wow.
And so
I have never felt ready for whatever comes in my life. I felt like those women are amazing.
Yeah, and so that's what they are doing right now. We have the podcast with Natalka Gomanyuk recorded 2 years ago, actually, right after the book Arsenal, where she curated the
Everything Matters.
Everything Matters, and right after book Arsenal, we recorded our conversation, and it's great. And I think that, this eagerness to do something, it was something that took us out of this stage of shock. Because when we were all trying to do anything, that's how the volunteering, great volunteering that we are having right now, this movement in Ukraine, it has all started because everybody had to be involved. Because if you're not doing anything, just reading the news, you'd probably go crazy. And that's what kept us busy, actually kept us sane, if you can put it like that.
And that makes sense. I had a tiny little bit of this being in New York on September 11th, and I was just in this state of shock, waiting for the rest of the city to blow up. And what could I do? But I was trying to donate blood because that seemed to be the only thing you could do. You could donate blood, and there were long lines all over the city to donate blood. There was no point in standing in a long line to donate blood. But I was standing in a long line to donate blood because you just feel like you have to do something. And I was a bad candidate to donate blood because I couldn't remember my blood type, and I was in and out of the country too often, and they didn't want people in and out of the country. But still, there was a sense of I didn't want to go away. I wanted to make them take my blood, like, because you want to do something, right? Like, the thought of doing nothing is so devastating.
I wanted to ask you, actually, we talked about this question a little bit before. You have been coming to Ukraine since 2003, 4?
2002, for the first time, yeah.
For the first time. How do you feel the society has changed and Ukrainian women as well, and in regards, well, to Ukrainian women, and what do you feel about them?
Wow.
Talking to them right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons it's difficult for me to say is when I first came to Ukraine, I did not know a single person. You know, I knew nobody. I came in 2002. I was actually coming to work on Wanda Wasilewska's archive. And I was in Moscow for the summer. I was doing archival work for my first book in Moscow, and I needed Wanda Wasilewska's materials, and they were in Kyiv, so I took the overnight train to Kyiv. I literally didn't know a single person, you know, and I remember I was at the archive where her collection was. The archivist said that, you know, she lived not just in Kyiv, but also in this dacha an hour away or something with Korneychuk, and that's where they did most of their writing. And the dacha had been a little museum, you know, during the communist period. It didn't seem that anyone...
What's now with this dacha?
Well, it was still...
Sorry, just one word. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. With Amelia, yes?
Yes.
Spirit and level.
And so now this dacha is abandoned, and you went there.
Okay, so right, so the dacha was still, I think, nominally a museum, but wasn't really being, you know, I don't know that anyone was visiting there anymore. I mean, there were no longer like Soviet kids going to like pay honor to Korneychuk, but she gave me the address, and you know, I saw this guy in a taxi outside a cafe, and I asked him if I could pay him to take me to this place. He was young. I mean, he wasn't any older than I was at the time, and he was a student, you know, or a grad student, or part-time driving a cab. You know, and I remember this so well because it was the first conversation I had with anyone in Ukraine besides the archivist, because I didn't know anyone there. But we were in the car together like all day, so like we were talking, and he was the first person who asked me, he's like, so tell me, what was it like being in New York on September 11th? Oh. You know, and I was very moved by that. And when we got to this museum, you know, he said, I'll wait for you in the car. And I said, oh, don't wait for me in the car. We were speaking in Russian. I said, don't wait for me in the car. That's silly. It might be interesting. You know, come in with me. I felt like we kind of knew each other by that point. We'd been in the car together. And so he comes in, and the woman who was taking care of the museum, who was an older woman, who had clearly been doing it all, you know, for a long time in the Soviet period, she somehow thought that I must be the American fiance of this good patriotic Ukrainian, and he wanted to show me Ukrainian culture, and that's why we were visiting Alexandra Korneychuk's house. It was a very interesting assumption. But what was very moving was that when this guy, the taxi driver, whose name I don't know, he realized that this would be good for me, because she would then show us things she might not otherwise show us, and he understood that I was a historian. Right. And he went along with it. Like, he went along with it and pretended he was. And I was so touched by this somehow. Like, I was so, I forget why I started telling that story. But anyway, I didn't know anyone. And so now I feel like I'm surrounded by these extraordinary women in Ukraine. I mean, I mentioned Angelina and Natalka and Alexandra Matvichuk. I mean, these women who I feel like are just amazing.
Yes,
you know, I mean, every time I listen to Alexandra talk,
as well.
Right? I'm like, why is she not running the world? Like, why is it you know, why are the psychopathic lunatics running the world? Why is Alexandra not running the world? But no, there are amazing people here. But it took me a long time of coming, you know, before I knew enough people to make that judgment. It does seem to me that Ukrainian society has changed tremendously. I mean, I felt like the Maidan was a real historical break.
You wrote a book about it.
Right, that's true. I mean, I really felt like it was a moment of kind of coming into being as real responsible subjects, you know, with a much more inclusive idea of nationhood. and I had that feeling anecdotally. I mean, like Volodya Kulik and Olha Olnug and Henrik Hale have a whole research project about this where they do sociological surveys and attitudes towards civic duty and democratic participation and I mean, have changed radically in Ukraine in a relatively short period of time. So it's clear this is a society that has changed a lot. I mean, Serhiy Zhadan was saying it, that he was writing in the beginning of the war. He's like, the Russians don't understand this is not the same country it was 10 years ago.
Yes,
they would have gotten us then, but they're not going to get us now. Like
that is the mistake number one. And a lot of say that that was Putin's mistake number one, that he figured that this country is the same as it has been 10 years ago.
But to me,
slowly but gradually we're changing.
And that is such a source of hope, right? Because we have to believe that we can change, we can grow, that societies can change and societies can grow. If we believe that we are all tethered, to what has been, then we're kind of lost. I mean, for me, that moment of the Maidan too, Volodya Yermolenko was talking about Sartre, who is, of course, a difficult figure in various ways. But Sartre has this idea of temporality, and of course, the problem of time for philosophers is always a problem. Time is always a problem, especially the present. Because how do you take hold of the present? The present has no duration, right? Like as soon as you grab it, it's already passed. And so it's like this infinitesimally, like it has there's no breath to it. So how do you define the present? And Sartre's idea of the present was the present is a border. It's the border between the past and the future, which is a border between what has been and has happened and cannot be changed and who you have been up to that moment and the potential to go beyond that. And that present, that's that border at every moment of every of our lives. But it's only at these moments like the Maidan of revolution where it's like that's illuminated and people have the sense of this is the moment when I have a chance to go beyond. This is the moment when I have a chance to be more. And that was an extraordinary thing to watch.
See, I agree with you. But what bothers me a lot, that Ukrainians, we are very good in the extreme situations. The Maidan, and the Orange Revolution, and then Maidan, and now the war that has been going on for 10 years now. It showed that we are capable of this fantastic unity, but at the eyes of the imminent threat. In more peaceful times, there's something weird is going on. We are unable to follow the rules, to be obedient, responsible, and but this stability is what makes societies work. And how do we learn that? I don't know.
It's an excellent question. No, and I see that in individuals as well. Like one of the people I admire most is Adam Mechnik in Poland, who I've known for a very long time, and he's somebody who is really unsuited to the everyday. Like, I mean, he can't drive a car or use his ability to use a phone or prepare food or look after. I mean, he's not really very functional. I mean, but genius. I don't think I'm giving away any secrets here if I say that. And I saw him when I saw him in Kyiv in 2014. He was just in the best form then I had seen him in years. Just absolute sharp, on point, right? It made me understand too that people like Adam, who held up so well in prison in conditions nobody else would have held up in, they're really unsuited for the everyday. But when the stakes are really high, when everything is at stake, when the fate of the world, when it's life and death, best possible form, willing to be absolutely generous, absolutely self-sacrifice, and I think that can work on a collective level too. But it's psychologically very interesting.
There's something to think about, to work on. I wanted to ask you, I took up already so much of your time, but the conversation is amazing. And once again, very thankful that you found the time. I wanted to talk about the hope. We connect our hopes to the future. And what about your personal hopes? Because recently you've moved from the US to Canada, and you'll be teaching in the University of Toronto now. what are your hopes? Do you plan on coming back, or what do you dream about? What are your hopes?
Well, no,
Your personal ones, and of course,
and my moving to Toronto is much less dramatic than like the media has made it sound. I mean, academics move from one good university to another good university all the time. No, I'm very happy to be in Toronto, but I never, I've thought about it. We're thinking about these offers for years. I never thought about like, I'll never go back to the States. That wasn't in my head at all. I mean, it's really not so dramatic. I'm really excited about teaching at the Monk School for various reasons. It's very interdisciplinary. But the hopes for the world, like my fantasy for the world, is that there's some black swan event, that causes one after another all of these evil regimes to fall. Remember, I was at a meeting with Alexander Matvichuk and some young students from various countries around here several months ago, and the Belarusians asked her something, and Alexander's like, believe me, if Putin falls, Lukashenko will be gone within 30 minutes, if not sooner. And I think she's right. I mean, you need to be, if Putin falls, Trump falls, you need to get rid of Arban, you need to get rid of Lukashenko, you need to get rid of the Iranian regime. There needs to be a Stunde Null, a fresh start. And my fantasy then is that Ukraine is the avant-garde of showing us a new way. It can't be about catching up with the West. The post-war order has fallen apart. It's over. It's over. The whole catching up model is not good, and Ukraine needs to say okay, we're going to rebuild, and we're going to rebuild better. We're not going to try to be just like Germany, or we're going to do it better. Okay, we've had time to think now. Everyone should get off Russian gas and oil. Everyone should get off gas and oil. Okay, if the world's going to survive, we're going to rebuild in green energy.
All new, and the world we are trying to build, the new world order you were saying about, it has to be sustainable.
Yes. So this is my fantasy. My fantasy is that not just that Ukraine wins, or not just that Ukraine catches up, but that that becomes a vanguard, that becomes a model for the rest of us and points a way forward.
No, that is a very hopeful. I want to hope for this too. Thank you very much for it. It just makes me wonder, what do we need as a nation and as individuals to be prepared for this? But I guess you cannot be prepared for this, can you?
You can never be completely prepared, because the future is always going to be full of surprises. But you can keep thinking. I mean, that's what I told Volodya. I mean, that's why it's one of the reasons why it's so moving to me to be here. I mean, of course, I'm a writer, so I love to see people reading books. You see, look at all these book publishers. Even in the midst of a war, even when people have to constantly run to the bomb shelter, people care about books, which means they care about thinking. And thinking is what makes us responsible subjects. I mean, this was, I think, Arendt's non-trivial insight, was that, in some ways the greatest crime is a failure to think, and evil is connected to thoughtlessness. And so that responsibility to think, and the habit of thinking and the insistence on thinking, that to me is what I'm feeling much more hopeful now that I'm here in Kyiv at the Arsenal than I was a week ago in Toronto. I'll say that much.
Well, thank you. We're trying our best. Actually, one of the books we are about to see to be presented on this book Arsenal is a joint book by Volodya Yarmolenko and Tatiana Harkova, Life on the Edge. She may translate it like this. And I cannot help but ask you one more question about you and your husband, Timothy Snyder. Do you have joint projects ever? Have you ever thought about making something together? Because the field of your professional interest is pretty much not similar, but you are this part of the world is still interesting to you, and questions of freedom and democracy and all these kinds of things. Have you ever thought about doing something together?
It's a question we get a lot. No, and I very much I'm always amazed when I read Volodya and Tanya, who actually co-author, and it's so seamless. It's the writing is so integrated, and it flows so well, and you can't tell what sentence one of them wrote and what sentence the other one wrote, unless they tell me. I actually can't imagine writing with anybody else. No, to me, not with Tim, but where it's true that we're actively engaged in a lot of very similar questions, and we're coming out with very similar positions. but the kind of aesthetic sensibilities of the actual prose we could never write together. But I don't think I could write with anyone. I'm a complete control freak about my writing. Like, I feel like I need to be responsible for every word. I want to choose every word, like, by myself. And we have very different voices. So, like, we can participate in projects together in which we each keep our own voice. But I don't think we could ever co-author a text.
Marci, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here, for taking up time for this conversation. I've learned so much from you in these 40 minutes, and I hope you were, asking me before, tell me something about Ukraine. I hope that I shared some of our bits and our experiences as well. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for advocating Ukraine in the world, because this voice is very important. Friends, we really need friends, and we cherish all of the friendships that we have built over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I'm very grateful to be so warmly received here, and I'm grateful to be able to draw strength from Ukrainians.
Thank you. Це був подкаст «Ночі дівочі».
Ночі дівочі.
З Марсі Шор, історикинею, historian and professor at the University of Toronto now. Дякую. Це був спеціальний випуск Книжкового Арсеналу. Сподіваюся, вам сподобається. А також допоможе повправлятися в знанні англійської мови. Почуємось. Щасливо. That's it, I guess. Thank you very much.